Hey guys, welcome to Jerry's Live. As always, I'm your host, Amy Gardner-Dean. Today it is JL77 for those of you playing along at home with us. If you go to the search box on jerrysartarama.com, type in JL77, you'll be able to see the list of supplies that we'll be using today, things that we're going to be discussing in case there's something, that you see that you can't live without or want to give a try on or just maybe look at to see about possibly purchasing in the future. So this is basically watercolor how-to lesson number 1, basic watercolor skills. Now, just saying, Frida and I talked about this earlier, didn't we, Frida? I am not now, nor have I ever been a watercolorist, whether I've played one on YouTube, Facebook, or otherwise. So I do watercolor. I had one class when I was 12 and got a little mini scholarship to take the class, and my parents opted to, as most parents do, get all the student grade art materials, and as a result it was very frustrating and annoying and I really hated it. So since then I'm using better quality materials. I enjoy it, but this decades ago, I don't remember any of the stuff from it, so this episode and researching for this episode's been sort of interesting to kind of go back over things, learn a lot of new things, and do a little bit of experimentation. So bear with me. Those of you who have a lot of watercolor knowledge, feel free to jump in and help us out. Or this may not be the episode for you if you want to have to rewatch learning basic skills, but if you've just kind of played with watercolors, but like me, you have no real formal experience, this may be really cool. There may be some things that you pick up that are just really kind of fun and interesting. There may be a supply that you don't know about or didn't know, I don't know, how to use that we show, and stick with us. So before we get started, the girls were saying that for our Jerry's Live Facebook group, which is a great way to kind of be in touch with other artists, get to see a lot of people posting things. After episodes, a lot of people go try stuff, then they post the results that they got in the group, which is really awesome to see. How many people do we have in the group now? And then we've got like 400 people pending, which may be from friends adding them. That's fine if you want to add your friends, but you need to tell your friends, you have to go to the group and answer the question. It's just to make sure no one's a robot. But there's how many people now?
That's almost 1,600 people.
So almost 1,600 people in the group. Not everybody always participates. A lot of people participate, but I think people enjoy it and they like looking at artwork and seeing questions people ask. You said there's something like 400, right, that need to answer the question. So if you apply to the group, never got in, that's probably why you need to go and get that question. You need to answer it, and then the gals will approve you to be in the group. So just so you know, that's there. It's a great resource. It's really nice community. It's fun. It's really good people. So and it seems like people are becoming friends, which I just love. So anyway, there's that option. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to first start with just kind of the basic things you really need to get started in watercolor. There's not a lot, but there are some parts of this that really you need to just buy mid-grade or better supplies, because it's going to, like it happened with me, really help your frustration level not be horrible. Katie's nodding her head like, oh my gosh, yes. The only thing my parents bought was a Kolinsky sable brush, a Raphael Kolinsky sable brush. I still have it from that long ago.
It's probably more important in watercolor than any other medium I've tried. Honestly.
Yes.
It makes more of a difference.
And it's really the paper and the paint. The beauty of brushes is there's lots of things out there that are actually very inexpensive that have become really good quality. So that's not as big of a deal. You don't have to go the full-on Kolinsky for watercolor brushes really anymore like you used to have to. But paint is a big one, and paper. So we're going to discuss that. Let's get started with paint. Now, what we're using for the demo is the only thing I'm going to show. It's Turner's set of 18 watercolor tubes. Now, They're tiny tubes. Everybody's going to be like, what? Why are those, you know, that's tiny. Watercolor is one of those magical mediums where it's not like oil paint, where within 3 or 4 big swipes of something, you can use all your paint that's on your palette. With this, it's just very super concentrated. You're not ever going to be painting with that paint straight from the tube in that thickness, even if you're doing dry brushing techniques. So a little bit will go a long way. There's some people that get tubes like this that don't use them in like 10 years, you know, if it's a color you don't use a lot of. So, and these have already been used actually in the travel palette that I'll show you in a minute. So that's tubes that I've already squirted a good bit of paint out. So I've got one of these sets in the size, I think, when we were looking at Turner, that's like 24. Still, after however many years, it's been what, 5-7 years, something like that. Still have plenty, still have some of the original colors on the palette. They haven't even been completely used up. So this is a fantastic set to start with because you're getting that full range of 18 colors. It's on sale right now for $25.99 for 18 colors. A lot of student grade starter sets, I think, run around this, and you're only getting maybe 8, maybe 12 colors. And then with that student grade, you're getting fillers, you're getting very low concentrations of pigment, you're getting frustration that's going to make it harder to learn mixing. The colors aren't going to look bright, they're not going to pop. So this is a way for the, you know, very cost conscious even, I think. For, you know, around $26, you've got 18 colors to start with that are a professional quality watercolor. So this is the set we're going to be using today so that you can kind of see what you get, what bang for your buck that you get with these. So that's where you don't want to skimp. One of the 2 places you just really don't want to skimp if you want to become well practiced, if you want to become successful, if you just want to have a good time, you know, without that kind of hanging over your head. So that's that. Then palettes. You've got to have a palette to work on. This isn't where you want to just put it on, you know, a tearaway palette or something like that. This is a water media. It's going to be fluid. You're going to need to add large amounts of water to do washes and things like that. So you need some room to actually kind of spread out. Now, just for a very inexpensive palette that's got a lid that will keep dust and dirt and grime. There's people that use butcher's trays. I use a butcher's tray. If you've got lots of animals and you've got, you know, dust and things in your house, that's not so much a problem. That stuff can pick off of the watercolor paper. It's just annoying. I don't like it in there when you get fuzzies and you're mixing your paint. Great way to keep it covered, but this gives you an extra palette set. This rim in the top has that recessed area for a reason. That gives you an extra area to get some washes done.
The whole thing. You're real bad about it.
Huh?
I use the whole thing.
No, that's exactly, and I do too. 4 other wells inside. Now this is a slant well palette. What that means is that that well comes down like this, where you've got the water that can flow down. Water's always going to the lowest point, and this is something that even on a flat paper you're going to learn in watercolor makes a big difference. Most people want to tend to cram their watercolor down in the bottom of this. That's not where you want to put your watercolor. You want to put it up at the higher part. We'll take some and just stick some up there. I'm going to use this because I've already got paint in the travel set to kind of take it back and forth and do a little bit of practicing. Watercolor doesn't have to be wet for you to use it. You can put it in here and it reconstitutes with water. If you want it to be still kind of moist, you can always keep you know, a little piece of sponge in there, mist your colors before you put that lid on. That will help. Use distilled water if you're going to do that, because then if you have well water, you can sometimes have a little bit of bacteria and stuff like that. Or if you get city water, you may have problems with chlorine and things like that. You can see right here, I've put it more up on that edge so that, because when you wet it, you've had your brush in other colors. Is it easier to, oh, there we go. We'll see if they can see that it's tilted there. When you wet it, you've had your brush in other colors, so it's a little bit dirty, that water. Even when you're, you know, picking up that paint, you want that to kind of go down to the bottom so it stays off your nice clean color. So that's kind of allowing a space for allowing that to happen, and you can pull your color out into your mixing area. So this is just a really good, inexpensive, basic palette that's nice and big, plenty of room, 12 by 16. It's on super sale right now for $12.85. So that's a very inexpensive way to have lots of room for colors. And you know what? I didn't count that this is a set of 18. This is, I don't even know, 24 wells, more than 24 wells. Maybe this is 36.
A whole lot of things.
Yeah, a whole lot. So as your color kind of library increases, you've got plenty of space to put those colors. Now, the nice thing about watercolors that acrylics and oils aren't is ridiculously portable. Not that your oils and acrylics can't be made to be portable, but they're kind of a lot more kitchen sink, right? Don't you think, Katie? Mm-hmm. You need a lot more to haul it along. This little watercolor palette seems small, like you wouldn't get a lot of mixing area out of it. This is the My Hello Fusion Airtight Watercolor Palette. This has 18 wells. I'll hold it up there so you can see it in the thing. It's got 2 decent sized wells here for doing your washes.
That's
now I did put those in the bottom so they wouldn't slide. What did you say?
Favorite.
And then if my nails worked, suddenly there's extra palette area. You've got all of this and then all of this. And the beauty of this palette is this is an airtight seal. I've been carrying this for almost a week now, and the colors are still moist. You can pick them up still really easily. So it's giving you all that room right there to be able to mix colors on, which is fantastic. But still that ability to keep that airtight, and that's 15 bucks. $14.79. This is what I've always carried stuff in. So great for tube watercolors. Tube washes you're not going to want to do because they have a lot less binder. So once they kind of air dry from it being open multiple times, they're going to crack and crumble and pop out of that. You don't want to make gouache like this in this type of a thing. You would want to do those in half pans instead. Let them dry first before, and you want to do those with top quality watercolor gouache if you're going to do that. But this is just, you know, perfect for tube watercolors. So this is the one we'll use. So I'm just going to set this aside. So now that you've got your paint, now that you've got a palette, then we are going to be going, and it's not that you can't use like the little flower palettes or all the other different things. Anything will work that gets you painting, but those are really good alternatives for very low cost with maximum benefit for holding paint. So let's see, then we're gonna go to brushes. Now the girls are gonna put up, I know people are gonna want to ask a ton of questions. We have already done a show on short-handled brushes that was called Brush Breakdown 2, taking the mystery out of short-handled brushes. We cover pretty much, don't we, Katie? Every stinking short-handled brush style imaginable, and not even the decorative ones. We did that in Brush Breakdown 3. I feel like we should be like Brush Breakdown 3. The final chapter. No, yeah, exactly.
Two breakdowns.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So that show is going to answer all of those questions. We did that last year. It was JL 13. They're going to put a link on there. Basically what I've done is I've just broken it down into the really 3 main styles for starting out that you probably want to invest in. The hake brushes, or some people call them hake, soft goat hair. It seems very sturdy and stiff right now. As soon as you wet it down, it's like painting with a limp noodle, but that's important. You actually want that because these are going to be brushes where you're going to cover large areas of water. When you stretch a piece of watercolor paper to tape it down, this is a great brush for adding the water to get that kind of stretched out after you've taped it. Great for doing just kind of an even wash, for laying down that color. They come in all sizes. From this is a 1 inch, this one is a 3, a 5. Don't we have like some that are like a 9 or something, or an 8?
Yeah.
That's like that's just ridiculous that you wouldn't use, but for a ping pong paddle and a brush at the same time, or I don't know, something. It's stinking like ping pong paddle size. Yeah, we've got it somewhere because we got it like basically as a joke to be kind of like,
I think you're using it for a drawing episode or something.
yes. So these are perfect for that. They're very inexpensive. This is where you don't have to have like the absolute top quality. Yes, Hakes do shed a little bit. This is watercolor. It's not like you've got varnish that's stuck in it and everything else. As soon as that your paper dries, you can just dust the hair off, blow the hair off, all gone, not a big deal. It's the softness that helps kind of for that very smooth and even lay down. These are not finished. It makes them look cheap. There's a reason they're not finished. They're designed to be able to just be stuck in the water and soaked. That keeps it from cracking. That keeps the varnish from coming off. That keeps the brush hair from falling out because it's sewn in. With these, it's actually taped. We have other ones that aren't taped that just kind of have an open area, so that's not going to crack. So a hockey brush is a good thing to have. These are $1.25 on the Try It right now.
I didn't really.
Mm-hmm. For the little #1, and with the washes we're going to do, it's probably what we're going to use. It's what I used to do a couple test ones. So for $1.25, you can get your wash brush to get started. But I mean, this one is ridiculously huge unless you're painting full-size sheets of watercolor, or you're probably not going to need it. That's under 10 bucks. All right. Then there's quill brushes. Why are these called quill? It's because these actually used to have this outer part that's now plastic was actually goose quill, real goose quill. The problem with that is in really arid environments like Arizona and stuff, it would crack and dry out. You had to soak it before you started painting so that it would tighten up so your brush performance wouldn't be loose and then tight and weird. Now they do it with synthetics. It's much better because it's the same performance, you know, either just started getting wet or, you know, 30 minutes into painting. These I really love. There's some that are made out of squirrel. Quill brushes are generally made out of squirrel. Squirrel gives a great softness. It carries the fluid media easily. It just expands with that water, but it's kind of loose and floppy like the goat hair. These are a beautiful blend of squirrel and synthetic. So it keeps that brush just a little bit stiffer. It gives it a little bit of spring back, which a regular squirrel brush is not going to do. It makes it more durable long term. It makes it so it keeps that much finer point, but it's still absorbent from the natural hair. So, and it makes it a lot less expensive because really good quality squirrel is expensive. So that synthetic helps with the price point. These are the Danube brushes. This is a quill set of 3. It comes with a bamboo roll up. It's $95.19. This, if you put these brushes together without this, it's like, I think over $120. So this is a really good deal. But just starting out, you can just buy 1 or buy 2. A good size with these types of things, it keeps a good point, so the bigger the better, because you can go across larger areas, but you can still, with that fine point, kind of get down into smaller areas too. But it gives you a great way to make these portable. And it just rolls up, and we'll put that over there. So that's a good style brush to have, because it's kind of a nice workhorse, carries a lot of fluid media, can do some detail work, but when you're getting into your detail work from there, you're going to want to work with a sable or a Kolinsky. Sable is the same kind of animal. It's a weasel slash marten slash little furry relative of a ferret. But Kolinsky are the best hair for doing this kind of stuff. Most of them come from what, Siberia? Mm-hmm. They're the male tail hair from the winter, so it's super bushy. Where it's super cold, it gives lots of volume. It's very absorbent, becoming almost impossible to find. So finding true Kolinskys that are really nice and big and bushy is almost a thing of the past. This brush is our Steinberg brush. That's our new Kolinsky watercolor brush. This brush is a size 4, and although it's very small, this is a way to try Kolinsky for only 20 bucks. $19.99 gives you a brush with this fantastic handle that I love, where you can hold it back up here. It's very comfortable. You can choke up on it right there. You're not going to want to move too far down the ferrule like everybody does when they start. It kind of is a smart way of giving you guidelines. It is a pointed round. It's not a full round where it's got that big fat belly, but because of the size, you wouldn't get a pointed round or a bushy round in this. So this is a way to get Kolinsky, get really nice, tight detail for a very, I mean, synthetic
That's a
brushes.
great brush for that price, yeah.
Synthetic blends usually aren't this inexpensive. And so this is a great investment in a good detail brush. You can do synthetic Kolinsky or even just regular red sable for your other stuff and then have this as your detail brush. So that's a good value. Now, we've got the Mimic Kolinsky is a full synthetic brush, but it gives you synthetic performance. And we've given these to people before, haven't we, Katie? And you don't tell them they're synthetic, and some people, unless you are just like a Kolinsky hair aficionado, and even then, you're just like, it's too gold. It doesn't look right.
Yeah.
And that's how you know.
Too shiny.
It's too shiny. Well, it's almost not even shiny. It's just not as poof. It doesn't give you that poof with pulling the water up.
Painting with them?
Yeah.
Can't even tell.
No. I actually prefer these because I feel like I can be really rough on the brush. If I want to use them in inks, it's not going to ruin a good brush. I still have that Kolinsky brush, but it's been ruined with ink, so therefore it can never go back to watercolor that I've got from when I was a kid. This will manage that ink without the buildup on the bristles because the synthetic just kind of sheds the medium right off really easily. They've got flats, they've got rounds. This is a set that if you wanted to make a little bit of an investment in brushes and have a full range of sizes to work from, $99.29 for all these, for a size 3/0, a 0, a 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12 round, and a 20 flat.
What?
Yes. So, I mean, that's a fantastic value.
Those are my go-to in the studio.
Yes.
Like, we use them for everything here. It's the first ones I grab.
Yep.
Because they just work for everything.
And they're the ones that walk off because people always want to use them and then put them in their pocket and don't bring them back. So, and we know who you are. No. So with these, if you didn't, couldn't go that full value to get, a whole set like this, I would say this size 12 is really nice. I almost might even go up the next size because it's going to keep a super nice point. I mean, that's a synthetic point, which is ridiculous. It's going to keep a super nice point, so you want a little bit more volume because the synthetics don't hold quite as much water. So I might go up one if I was just going to get one brush. And then with the flats, I think I might go up even a little bit more than that because I would use it for a wash brush in place of maybe a hake.
But
if I wanted.
You can still get the tiniest little line.
Oh no, you can get,
It's crazy.
yes, I agree. And in fact, I prefer that over these little tiny ones. Other than like that works nice as a spotter where you're just putting little touches of color. This you can get a really fine line, but it can hold a lot more volume so you can keep going for a while rather than out of paint in the middle of the stroke.
Yep.
So, so these would be really great ones that I would recommend for beginners because they give you the performance of high-end real Kolinsky without the issue of the price,
Well, you're not afraid to mess them up either with that
Right.
price, which is nice.
Yes, exactly. So that is a great brush. Now, two types of brushes that aren't for applying the paint. Well, I mean, one is for not applying the paint in places you don't want to go. Masking fluid. We're going to talk about that very quickly. That's in kind of our extra things. Masking fluid is your friend, and it's something that is going to keep, especially starting out, you get over exuberant or it gets splashy, right, Katie? And you end up putting paint where you don't want it to go. You can pull that up with most colors unless they're staining. Phthalo, just forget it. It's not going to happen. Yes, well, yes, if you have good paper. But you really need to have a good masking fluid. And Katie, am I joking that I was so excited with the Turner? Turner's came out with a masking fluid. There's only one other brand that I had used before that I really liked, which was the Pabio stuff. This stuff is the bomb. It blows that out of the water. I've got some on an artwork that we took off more than a month after, and I did not expect figured it would tear the paper up. was perfectly fine underneath and came up like a dream. It dries super fast. It's white, but it dries to like a cream color, so you can definitely see where it is easily. And everywhere that got masked totally like covered it. Where with some masking fluids, it looks like it is, but it's a lot thinner than what it looks like.
Can you explain what a masking fluid does for those who don't know?
Masking fluid is going to cover your paper and keep whatever is under that white. It masks it out, like if you put like painter's tape if you're painting your house, but it doesn't leak under the edges like painter's tape does. The big problem with this is although the adhesion is great and it covers everything and it's good to go, when you put it in brushes, it ruins them. So there's some chemicals you can use to get it out, but they're also going to damage most brushes. So you don't want to do that with your art brushes. This is the masking fluid brush set of 12. It's got some flats in it and it's got some rounds. This is $5 for 10 brushes. So you don't have to damage brushes and then try to either scrap them or, you know, that are expensive. If these get yucky, you chuck them. Perfect thing to do. Yes, Frida?
Can you use masking fluid over a dry color?
You can use, if it's a good quality masking fluid, you can use it over a dry color. Yes, someone asked that. Great question. And this will work for that too without pulling the color up. So this is definitely, as you're learning, the best quality masking fluid that's going to kind of give you the easiest learning curve. Some of them require rubber cement squares to pick them up. Some of them pick and peel the paper. I will say though that if you're using paper pulp paper, any masking fluid is going to be very difficult and most likely to tear your paper. So it's something where when we talk about paper, cotton is really great, and cotton, especially if you're going to be using masking fluid, is good. So that's the before you even paint, covering your bases. Then after you paint and make a mistake, because it happens.
It happens.
Scrubber brushes. Scrubber brushes are these are stiff and synthetic. They make some from hog's hair. You can even use oil brushes that haven't been used in oil for it, but I wouldn't recommend it because that long handle kind of doesn't give you the control. These have some filberts, they have some long flats, they have some very, very short bristle brushes. Different ones are going to give you kind of different control, different ways to lift. We'll talk about lifting, we'll show kind of how to do it later and use some of these brushes. This is something you want to practice on with scrap paper and have a handle on before you just start scrubbing away at your painting, because people get very enthusiastic, and although if you're using cotton paper, it's still cotton, you can still damage sizing, you can damage the surface. It can make it so it doesn't take the watercolor back over it again, what you've pulled up, because you've damaged the surface of that paper. So definitely practice on paper scraps on the back of old paintings that you don't really want to keep. Anything like that, definitely these can be your friend, but they can also be your enemy if not used right. So definitely a good investment and something to practice with. You can buy these individually, but this set of 7 is only $14.39, so it's a nice way to have multiple sizes to kind of help you with any types of lifting you would need to do. So paper, in that case, we're going to be showing Fabriano paper as we work today. Fabriano, I've got cold press, that's 140 pounds. I've got cold press, that's 300 pounds. 300 pounds is going to be, when they do a paper weight, we're just going to give you a quick rundown. We did an episode, JL50, all about watercolor papers. They're going to put the link in there. I don't want to field questions about that for today, just because all that information is there for you to learn. And I believe we put a document in the Facebook group as well on watercolor paper, on explaining the weights. When it says 140 pounds, it means a ream of 22 by 30 inch paper weighs 140 pounds. And it's, what, 500 sheets is a ream. So 300 pound paper means that 500 pieces of that same size weighs 300 pounds, because it's essentially a little bit more than double thick. So 300-pound paper is great if you don't want to have to tape things down, if you don't want to have to stretch paper. Watercolor paper will buckle if it's 140 pounds or lesser. So 300-pound will lay flat, but it's a lot more expensive. So you kind of have to pick your poison to decide what you want to do on that, but those are the things that we're going to look at and work with today. So with these, I just got these in sheets. You can buy the big sheets and either cut them down or tear them down in like the 22 by 30 inch size. When you're learning, sometimes it's, number one, handling the paper you don't want to do unless you have to, and then you don't want your hands touching it a whole lot because the oils will transfer to the paper. And since this is cotton paper, which means it's made out of cotton fibers, which means it's very absorbent and going to kind of give you that maximum kind of light and color refraction, it's also going to absorb your hand oils super duper easy. And then the water is not going to absorb absolutely the same as the areas that don't. So you'll see all sorts of weird things happening. So don't handle it with your bare hands. Wash your hands before you handle paper, and then maybe even wear gloves would be a good recommendation. So cut sheets, much nicer to work with. You pop it out, you go. You don't have to deal with all that handling. Now, paper pulp papers. Papers are internally and externally sized. Paper pulp papers don't handle a lot of heavy washes or any scrubbing really whatsoever without a lot of damage to the paper. So you're kind of playing with fire in that even with practicing, every paper works differently. Don't you think, Katie? Even different brands work differently.
Yeah.
The sizings take differently. Fabriano, the Artistico, uses vegetable-based sizing. Arches still uses animal sizing. Those two work very differently together. I think the animal sizing is a little bit more forgiving, personally. So it's good to pick a paper and stick with it. Cellulose paper pulp papers are going to really kind of give you all across the board, especially with the different brands. So, and just the frustration level of it. So check out that episode of All About Papers. That will kind of help explain that more, and we're just going to go from there. Now, other quick necessary items. Complete Watercolors Essential Notebook by Gordon Mckenzie. This book was fantastic. A wealth of information on pigments, he gives kind of different little assignments for, do this, do that. Talks about this, one of these was brushwork, explaining how to use your brush, different ways to hold it that are going to give you different results, different pressure, different line work. It was really kind of a fun book, and almost to the point of where the technological part about pigments, I was a little bit, wow, this is even a little much for me. So I skipped ahead.
You're a pigment nerd.
I skipped ahead to the brushwork. But shows all sorts of examples, talks about cool and warm colors, color palettes, masking. This gave all sorts, and some of these things give you kind of this painting and then step-by-step kind of little projects and how to do them. So it is essential, like the essential knowledge of all sorts of different experiments, different watercolorists, and their works. It's really nice, and it's a very pretty book, even just on a coffee table. So that's a really nice item. The brush washer and basin, I grabbed one from around here, but I need more water than this because we're going to go through a lot and be doing a lot of washes. This is a great, you can see we use this all the time, a great little thing you can kind of put your brushes in, soak them. It's got a beater, but this also gives you a little travel palette. If you want to take water and a palette at the same time, you can have colors in there. You got a little bit of mixing. You got the lid to mix it in, but it also covers up your water to keep it clean if you're not working. So that's a fantastic little basin. Then we've got gum arabic. This is a medium that just helps with washes and kind of helps with the flow and the absorption. We're not going to use it today, but probably like the next level class that we do on this, we will talk about mediums and we will use some of them. So gum arabic is a good thing to have. Then we've got the black masking tape. This actually is a pH neutral masking tape. It is perfect for actually taping stuff down. A lot of people use the old gummed tape. You don't have to do that anymore. This comes up much easier. It, to me, doesn't damage, the adhesive doesn't damage the paper as much. It's resistant to water, solvents, and oil, so you can actually tape off oil paper and things like that if you do multiple mediums. And you can actually use it for masking off areas like Brennan Day's work. He's been showing some of that in the Jerry's Live group. He uses blue painter's tape. This stuff does the same type of thing. You can actually put it over your paper or canvas. It's not going to damage it. It pulls up very easily. I just like the black. It's easy to see. Black, white of the paper. Works for me. So, plus you don't know I like black, so big surprise there. The Soho Urban Artist spray bottle. This is perfect. There's some different misting and spritzing techniques. So this is a great little item. $1.50 for that. We talked about the masking fluid. Sponges. Sponges are actually something that's very helpful. This is just one from a pack. I put a pack on that's got kind of a value pack. There's different ones with different sponges. Natural sponges are what you need, not cellulose, synthetic sponges. This helps, you know, pull up extra water when you don't want it. You can actually take it, wet it down, and wet your paper evenly for a wash with this. They're just really handy. It's great for pulling out color quick if you get stuff somewhere. We'll show that with some of the lifting techniques. And I think that's it. Oh, we're using the board from the Creative Mark drawing board set, just because this was easy to grab, because we can show stretching the paper and we can show that off there. It comes with a little easel that you can use on a table that would be perfect for some of these washes where you have to kind of tilt it. I've just got it held up on some squeegees because that's, I guess I'm doing ghetto watercolor today, but that's what's about what works. Katie's like, oh. Other things that you really need to have: paper towels, a hair dryer.
Lots of paper towels.
That has a low temperature, because if you're like me and waiting is not your forte, a hair dryer with a low setting can kind of dry paper quickly and you can get started instead of having to walk off and wait for something to dry and come back. An old toothbrush is good for doing like spattering and some techniques like that, dry brushing. So we've got that. Kosher salt. We'll show you what that can do as well. Now, all right, we are,
Amy,
yes.
Can you remove that brush from that mannequin?
That was not where it was earlier. That's fallen down.
We had an eagle-eyed YouTube viewer.
Yeah. Was it Patty?
No.
Wow.
No.
I figured it'd be Patty. Sorry about that. He was holding it up like a baseball bat and slowly it. Well, there we go. One for the outtakes reel. Only we're live, so that doesn't. Sorry, I apologize for that. All right, so let's talk about how to stretch watercolor paper. I'm going to use a small piece just so for the sake of
Easier to get it all in here.
going more quickly. This is the Artistico. This is an 11 by 14 inch sheet of cold press. I'm going to pop this over. It's alive! Oh, 2 pieces. Tom used to work in a 300 pound watercolor paper loose. It's like, oh, that looks right. No, it's not. All right. Just maybe lay that down so we don't have issues with it. All right. So what you're going to want to do is actually tape the outside first. There are old school people who, and in that book, I was very sad. The man talked about soaking your paper for multiple hours. That might have worked back in the old day when it was animal sizing. So much paper now, just because people are very, concerned about not using animal products. A lot of it's vegetable sized. It can't hold up for that kind of soaking. You do not want to do that. So there's no reason to add a lot of extra water. That can mess up external sizing, that can mess up internal sizing. It can change the way that your paper responds and absorbs. So I recommend not doing it. Now, there are watercolor stretching boards that some people are very devout fans of. I think that would be really cool. but that also takes a long time. This is just,
Quick and easy.
this is really easy. And I like the black because you can see where it's at. So, all right. So we got that put down. Now, what we are going to do, and you could do this flat, you could do it tilted, it probably doesn't matter. Flat may be better, but I've just got this up here and we're just doing this for the sake of argument. I'm going to use some of these brushes. I'm going to use the kind of mid-size one. I think this one may be overkill. There's no need to wet this first because then it's not going to want to stick to your board with the tape. So I'm wetting this down, and as you can see, that became much softer and less, it's kind of floppy now. Didn't I just say I wasn't going to use this big one? Only 2 shots of the 4-shot espresso have kicked in, apparently, Katie. Okay, now I remember what brush I needed. All right, that's better. So what we're going to do is just wet this down. It's not like I'm doing a dry wash. I'm going to wet it going this way the entire way. Now, paper wants to buckle. It wants to buckle up in the middle and come down on the sides. That's just the nature of the beast. So this is holding it on the outside completely. And although it's going to buckle up in the middle, it's pulled it tight. Remember, this is cotton. Cotton does what when you get it wet, Katie?
I know.
Shrink.
Shrinks. Oh yeah, because I put my clothes back in the washing machine, they go back to normal size.
Yes, exactly. So it's going to shrink on here once we got this all good. I can feel it starting to come up through the brush. So we let this sit a few minutes. You can see it now. I don't know if they can see it from straight on or not. It's just, I can see it because of the shine of the angle of the water. I'm gonna let that soak in real nice.
Can you push the board
Need to
forward
put
a little?
yeah. There we go. Is that better? Okay. Wetting the sponge first and then pulling out the excess. I'm gonna give this, push the excess water up here where it's a little drier. Now, when you've got too much water, when you're doing washes, we'll talk about that while we're kind of doing this, you're going to see it really reflective, really shiny. When you don't have enough water, it's going to be very dull. You'll be able to kind of see that the paper is wet from the tone of it. It'll look very matte though. That's too dry. So right now it's excessively wet in some areas. So I'm just kind of trying to push that to the sides. And like I said, with goat hair, you're going to get hair here too that comes out. That's to be expected. Just ignore it. It dries off and goes away. All right. So it's pulling everywhere. It looks pretty equal in that. This is nice and dry. I'm just going to blot it gently. Doesn't have to be so much even in that I just want a lot of that shine kind of blotted off so it's not going to have areas that set. Just so as it dries more evenly.
So I
Yes.
have a viewer question.
Okay.
She asks, well, she was under the impression that the paper needed to be wet first and then, which allows it to stretch, and then taped or stapled down to allow it to dry.
There's different schools of thought. There's different people have different theories. What's worked for me is this. Before I have wet it down, just lightly in the back and then put it down, I haven't really noticed enough difference where I would say that one works better than the other. If you feel kind of more comfortable with that, you can do that. you just may have more problems with getting the tape actually down on it. With a stretching board, that's no big deal because you've got a kind of a plasticky surface that you can put it over and do that. But what it's doing is it's already doing the buckling, just like when you use a block. A block's not been stretched, it's just taped around the outside. This is going on that same premise.
I think it's different papers work a little bit different with different techniques as well too. Some of them are gonna work better one way than the other.
Well, and an animal-sized one may be better to wet both sides, but just with the Fabriano, this has worked really nicely for me. So we're just going to set that aside because we're obviously not going to use it while it's still wet. You can, if you're in a hurry, use a hairdryer. You don't want to make it super hot because you want it to dry evenly. I would say just let it set and dry. It's not gonna, you could do, you know, if you've got multiple boards, you could do several of these at a time, have some just already done, do a set at a time, or, you know, something like that. So I'm gonna just put this here.
Amy, should you
Yes.
do the same thing on a watercolor canvas?
No, a watercolor canvas is not paper. A watercolor canvas is, what she asked is, should you size a watercolor canvas? A watercolor canvas just has an absorbent, probably acrylic based ground put on top of it to be able to absorb that water media. You don't want to put a lot of extra water on that because those are only so absorbent. That's cotton. It's like a sponge. Those are just like fabric that takes a little bit of water and otherwise it's just overly soaked. It's definitely not advisable to do that. All right, so I did a little swatch thing. They are here. With paper presses, hot press, cold press, and rough press. You can see how the same paint applied in the exact same, is that up in there, your overhead, Katie? Can you hit that because they'll be able to see that? Exact same application. This is the hot press. It's very smooth, it's not as absorbent, it sits on top because it doesn't have as much texture to pull that in. You can see that it went to the outside, these were not wet down first, not taped down. Oozed to the outside as it dried because it didn't absorb as fast. You can see rough press and you can see cold press. Took it very, very similarly, but you can see the paper texture, don't you think, Katie? Pretty well in that. Cold press is a nice even texture, it's a little bit more forgiving. Rough press with a lot of pigment, if I'd really loaded this down, it would have like big nooks and crannies and deep recesses that pigment would collect in. If you work with any pigment that is granulated, which what that means is because of the, you know, type of grind that it is, because of the pigment, a lot of times they're the kind of mineral pigment based colors, you will get those bigger pieces caught down in those, and it gives a different look. Some people love it, some people don't. So this is why it's really good to maybe take your colors, do color swatches, right? We always talk about color swatches on the paper you're going to use before you actually start your work, so you know what those colors look like. This right here is one of those granulated pigments, if you can see it. Can I see that pretty well, Katie?
You can hold it up a little if you want.
Right there, where you can really see that separation. And this is cold press, so imagine what that would look like on a rough press surface.
So I apologize if you've already addressed this, but
That's
between
fine.
reading comments and going back and forth, I probably missed it if you have. There seems to be some confusion with the viewers about the need for wetting down the sheet and stretching it. Why do you do that? What is the purpose of that?
What we'll
And
do is
also-
we'll tape, when we're doing this, we'll tape pieces down that have not been stretched. You'll be able to see what it does and how it buckles on that lighter weight. So
And
what's the other?
The other part of that was you need to do it with both cold press and hot press, correct? Is there a
It's
difference?
the paper weight. It's not is the issue. It's not the press. Press is just that surface. Hot press is very smooth. It's run through hot rollers that basically steamroll that into a super baby butt smooth surface. Cold press has rag blankets or something that are put around it, like felt, run through the press. It picks up the texture of whatever that is, or it might even be just left to air dry, Rough press either has a lot of texture applied to it and rolled, or just air dried, and it just variates that surface texture as the air dries it out and it kind of shrinks back. So we'll show you, because with these we're not going to tape anything down because it'd be way too many boards to deal with. Or I mean, we're not going to stretch it. This is for our...
Are they not understanding what buckling means for you guys?
I think that's part of it.
If you've ever painted on watercolor paper and the paper does this as you're looking down on it, that's buckling. When you stretch it, it's going to make it so that it's gotten wet, it's stretched and buckled out, it's going to dry back down, so it makes it tighter. It still will buckle slightly with that 140-pound press, but it's not going to be near as bad, because what happens is if you get that buckling in the middle, your pigment goes to the path of least resistance, just like when you spill water on an uneven floor. If your floor goes down like that, if you live in an old house and you put a marble down, you find out real quick where that path of least resistance is. It's the same with paint. So your pigment is heavier than the water, so it's going to automatically go downhill wherever that is. So if your paper is buckling, unless you're using dry brush techniques, it will always go out that way.
Well, flat with watercolor. Flat
Yes.
paper, flat palette, flat everything.
Yes,
No.
exactly.
Blocks. Do you need to...
Blocks are taped down. That's already been done for you. It's taped all around the edges. It will buckle slightly, but not anything like, because it's held down super hard. Blocks are just a lot more expensive because somebody's gone to all that time and effort for you.
Man, they're convenient.
They're convenient. As Mikey learned today, you just have to take them off carefully. we had an incident with a block in the studio today. It didn't end pretty. Thankfully it wasn't the paper that did that. Okay, so with this, what I've done is a basic flat wash first. I did not have this taped down. If you can see how this is a little darker here, a little darker here. Why? Because the paper buckled right across there. Does that make sense now? So what we're going to do with this is I'm going to tape this down.
It's kind of like if you've ever taken copy paper or just drawing paper and got it wet.
Yes.
And it ripples real bad.
It's that same
That's
premise.
what you want to avoid.
Definitely. Okay. I'm going to just tape down our bottom. You'll see that it'll probably buckle some in the middle. It's hard for them to see on camera just because this is, it's not like ridiculously inches that it's going up. All right.
You can extreme it and put copy paper up there and they can see how it'll do.
Yeah. All right. So this is a basic flat wash. All right. What we're doing is trying to get the smoothest color surface that we can. So the technique for how this is done is to first take, I'm gonna get this, I'm gonna take my Hake brush. You can see my pencil lines, right? That's far enough in there? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Move things.
It's a little more rectangle, so if you wanted to like turn it sideways, I don't know if that'll help. I don't know what you're planning on doing, so.
I'm gonna maybe that will, it's just not quite as big of a drop with the, all right. Okay. With this, usually with watercolor, you don't want it at an angle. There's techniques you do want it at an angle because it can do some kind of neat, fun things for you. With this, the way that we're doing it is, remember I said pigment runs downhill? We're using gravity to help us. So this doesn't have to be exact because it's not I'm not drawing a specific, you know, item. There's not trees here. There's not whatever. We're just trying to kind of get our box put in. All right. So from the top, it's wet. From the top, it's wet all the way down. I've wet this entire area, okay? Now, what we're gonna do, make sure I've wet the entire area, okay. We're gonna pick a color. Oh, that blue was much lighter than I thought. Let's grab some Let's grab some phthalo. That'll be nice and easy to see. What do you think, Katie?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm starting at the top. Can everybody see how that pigment's pulling down?
So pretty.
Yeah, this is a little wetter than it necessarily needed to be. Now I'm kind of overlapping those lines. Can everybody see that? And you can see with some of it, as I'm pulling it, you can see kind of a little bit of line there with the pigment. Let's see how gravity is pulling that line out. I'm going to take this and do this. Get rid of that for a minute. See how that's very even? Now, I like that. It looks pretty good and even. I think that in some cases, I would pull that off or lay it dry flat now, just because then it's going to kind of go off to the side. But see how that is a nice, flat, very even, just from doing that with my brush. Can everybody see that all right? Hold it up a little.
And just like move it up
Oh.
towards me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We've got it zoomed in pretty close today, so they can
All
see
right.
the technique, so it's a little
So
smaller.
see, that's very even. That is just a basic flat wash, okay? We primed the surface first with water. It was a little shinier than probably I'd like, but we're trying to move pretty quickly through these. I could have made it a little kind of flatter, but this shouldn't be a problem. The pigment's gonna just be a little bit dark around the edges. I could go in and soften that up. All right? So let's go to the next thing. I'm going to pull this off and we're going to stick this off to the side. Does anybody have any questions about that before we go on to a graded wash? Keep this here while I'm pulling. See how nice this pulls up?
One person asked about an ombre wash, which is what you're...
That's a variegated wash. That's something that we can talk about. Well, there's a graded, that's what we're going to talk about next. It kind of lies somewhere in there. It'll give some ideas for that. It's so sticky. Whoop.
You're using Turner watercolors today, right?
Yes, I sure am.
Exclusively.
Yes, we are. All right, let me set this over here. All right. Next, we're going to do that graded wash. Let me put that there. And, well, yeah, because then we can pull the thing down for...
About to switch you over to, hold on,
That's fine. I'm just making sure it's,
here.
that it's... Where's my
I
tape?
might have more room up
Now
there.
you got more room.
Woohoo! Okay.
Made you tiny.
This
I'm gonna
sounds a
do-
little off, so we're hiding your mouth a little bit.
Do what? What?
This sounds a little off,
Oh, no.
so your mouth is a little off, so we're making you a little smaller.
So do I look like I'm...
You look like you're in
I'm-
old.
Like a Japanese
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah, I'm in-
film dub.
I will kill you. Like that?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Sorry about that. I have not played in one of those either.
Yes.
That we
That's
know of.
been released in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Shh, Frida, don't tell anybody. This tape is so satisfying. You want to take it home and tape everything. What?
I'm not gonna lie, I use watercolor tape for everything.
It just is nice, and the texture, it makes me happy. And it's black. Katie didn't see that. I'm glad. Okay. And now I've got phthalo on everything. All right. So next we are going to go to a graded wash. Now a graded wash, we're going to actually go back and do that water first. Since there's phthalo in this, I feel like maybe I should get another brush.
One of those staining colors.
Yes, I know. That's fine. We'll do phthalo in it, but I'm gonna use this. All right. So I'm doing the same thing. Gonna wet this whole area down first. I keep almost sticking it in the phthalo. That's... Somebody psychic?
Oh, about the graded wash?
Yeah.
No. All right. All right, so we've got that wet down. You can see the poop. All right, I'm checking to see, just make sure it's not too shiny anywhere. It's still a little dull up here, so let's fix that. All right, that's about what I want. Gonna go back in with my phthalo. This is a graded wash, so we want that surface to be angled. This is great for sky or watercolor, or water, like if you're doing lake or something like that. What you're doing is the first pass that you do has the most pigment. Okay, so my first pass is gonna be with the most pigment here. I need to put up on the my Jerry's board. There we go. Okay. Then rinsing it out. A little less. You want to go right up into that. This part may be pulling it down. A little less. You can see that slowly pulling down. Can you guys see that? Okay. Now, this may work better with a non-staining. You can really see it nicely in here. Kind of got gloppy over there because it was a little wetter. But with practice, you can pull that down, and you leave this obviously to sit at that angle to work on it, and it will slowly, until it dries, that pigment is going to move until it kind of levels out and becomes matte. So that's how a graded wash could look. Now you can see with that staining, I don't know how well you can see that, it looks almost like when you're looking and you see the thundercloud and you see the rain coming out of the sky. So that would be a really cool technique for doing it graded and then kind of leaving it more wet down here so that it looks like it's falling.
Hey, Amy.
Yes,
In a moment,
Amanda.
Can you show how you're loading the brush? Like, to get
Sure.
the nice, like, paint across the bristles?
Just mixing it with water, but yeah, sure, we can do that. We'll show how somebody asked about how we're loading the brush. Let's do this. I'm gonna flip this, so ignore what's gonna happen from here on out, because it's gonna go down now. Huh?
Flat it.
Well, no, because you want it to keep moving, ideally. I don't have enough. Oh, you know what? I can take the back of that other board. We'll leave this at the angle. We'll take the back of this board and tape another piece. There we go. There, are you happy now? Are you happy now? All right, variegated wash. We need to use a different color too. The phthalo is boring me. Go to where it's really at, to the dioxazine, Katie. We can't do teal. Teal has too much water in it, or too much white in it, so you're just gonna have to be happy with the dioxazine.
I'm just happy you're saying it correctly.
What, dioxazine? How else would you say it?
Oh, you should hear it.
Wow.
It's one of the hard ones.
No, it's not.
Frida's favorite is alizarin.
Yes, or quinacridone. People
Yeah.
always.
Alizarin like Slytherin, not Alizarian like Aryan. I'm gonna throw that out there.
All right, so that's funny. What we're doing next is we're going to do a variegated wash. What that's going to be is multiple colors that kind of blend together. You do several bands of this. You do it when it's wet on wet. You need to start with a clean brush every time you start that new color, and do a couple bands under it. I'm going to do it this way, just to make sure that we've got room for the bands. Will that work? Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
I'm switching.
all right.
It has a hard time focusing on the white paper.
That's fine.
Yeah.
It'll get better once we got some color on it.
Can't tell anything's happening.
All right, I'm gonna,
You usually pull it down just
Well, I was gonna, okay. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me, I'll show how I'm actually loading the brush. I'll try to put it up there. Okay. This is a little wet, so I'm gonna just, ooh, see it put the yellow in there. Dang it. Okay. That's a little better. All right. Use this brush. So this is how when I'm doing this, I'm just taking it with water, I'm picking a color, just pulling enough out where I'm activating it with water so it's not a solid anymore. Does that make sense, Frida?
Are you just trying to get it to sit on top of the paper, or you want it to soak in a little bit?
You want it to be on top.
Does it need to be a bubble it's floating on?
No. Oh, to add it to the brush?
No, the water you're putting on the paper.
You want it to where it's not shiny, but it's not dull either. You want to be able to see that it's wet, but if it starts getting dull, it's not wet enough for that travel to start happening. I'm going to have to put a little bit more because this is longer.
That's a good way to describe it.
Okay. So there's my green.
Hey, Amy,
Yes.
on the hotcake, the
Mhm.
goat hair brushes, the blue part,
Who has problems saying what? But what?
You
I'm
said
sorry.
what you said either way.
I know, I'm joking.
is that something to help it resist water? The blue part on that brush? Someone's asking if it was tape, and I know it's not tape.
It's tape. It's to try to keep out some water. It is like a tape almost.
It looks dipped or painted. Like, but basically it's a barrier for water.
It's a barrier. You don't have to get them with that. You can get them, you know, however. Okay, see how I'm adding this color into that color?
Ooh.
Then I'm gonna pull it again. Oop. Hold on. Let's get that. You can see it. Can you see it starting to pull down now into the yellow? This is something that's going to take practice. It's not something you can just. Can everybody see how that's starting to? Can you? Is there a way to zoom in? It's hard to see initially because it's okay.
It's a super fun way to spend a Saturday afternoon if it's raining.
Yeah.
So when I'm
Mhm.
doing gradients, what I do is I have 2 paint brushes, one for each color, and I start at the top with one color and work down, and with every stroke there's less pigment, and then I start at the bottom with the other color and I just sort of overlap them, and I add a little water to the brush if I need the color to be lighter.
That makes sense.
Watercolor's fickle. You have to make sure you're really blocking your brush.
Yes.
She does what she wants.
She
I
does
do.
what she wants.
It's so very zen though.
It
It
is.
is watercolor.
But watercolor is one of those things that, like, even you can never fully control it. You're just trying to work with it.
She won't be tamed.
Neither will you apparently.
Never. What are the colors you're using here in this beautiful?
I'm guessing the Viridian, whichever one's the, I think it's permanent. I don't know. I don't have the color names in front of me of the set. I mixed one
Rest
orange
assured
and then
they're
that.
in the set of 18.
Yes,
whichever one.
they are. All right, now does that make sense? So as this slowly is drying, this is just going to keep creeping. You could actually tilt this and it would work faster. It's just something you need to play with at home, get the hang of. Different papers are going to react differently. from what the books say, even different pigments are going to react differently. So some are going to be fast to move, others are going to be very slow. They may not even creep through first. So this is something where it's good to have extra paper around to try what you're wanting to do with your painting before you just necessarily do the painting. So you kind of have that troubleshooting. Watercolor isn't like acrylics where if you don't like it, you can just paint over it and wait 20 minutes and start over. All right, so that is the variegated wash. Now, wet on dry. It's basically what watercolor is when you don't have time to do it a lot. You work on your painting for a while, you go do your thing, you come back, you know, you changed a couple loads of laundry, whatever you're doing, and then you keep painting, right? You go right back over it. Kind of like the picture of Amber Rose that still lingers, Katie. She's still around.
She gets used to making.
She does.
Amber is the cow?
The cow.
The cow.
The cow. There's a celebrity.
Did you, oh,
You might want to make.
I know nothing of that, so
A rather
you know me.
scandalous celebrity, so.
The cow.
So many
The
things.
cow.
I mean, yeah.
Amber Rose the cow.
Perhaps people have called her that. I don't know who it is, so. But anyway, this is the cow. You can actually still see the masking fluid on this part. I took it off the face. Masking fluid's on there. I felt confident enough that I can leave that, and I think it'll come off fine, Katie.
We left it on there for like, what, a month last time it came off, no problem?
More than that. So at this point, I'm tempting fate. I'm like, come on, bring it. Is it gonna work? We'll find out.
Way to find out.
All right.
So cute.
So with wet on dry, what you're doing is you're layering a new wash over earlier dry layers. It's useful for building paint up where you want richer, deeper tones. It helps sharpen them. It helps bring definition to parts of a painting. As you can see, these dark edges, all these little kind of darker places, lighter places, help define that form of the cow, help define the color, help define the deepness. It sounds like it's a technique. It's basically just letting it dry and painting back over it. I mean,
But you have to really let it dry.
you do.
Don't jump the gun.
No, either use a hair dryer until it's bone dry,
Yeah.
or walk away and do something else. Because as long as that's, especially if you live in a humid environment like we do, if there's any even dampness to the touch, it can take any paint you put on, and like that, it goes for that lowest point, and which is usually out, because you're putting a blob of water on, just like a bead of water. It sits up, slowly disperses, so that pigment's gonna go whoop.
Nothing will make me more mad than not
Now,
thinking you're doing great and then.
yes, if you're doing this and you see harder edges and you don't like it, and there's places that you're like, I wish that didn't look like that, you can always, it's watercolor, so it reconstitutes, right, Katie?
Mm-hmm.
You can always take a brush and you
Just
can
sometimes
go,
good and sometimes bad.
yes, well, you can go in and you can say, I'm gonna smooth that out, like this is really dry brushy. I can go in, I can pull that, I can smooth it out,
Two things.
right? Yes.
Number one,
Only
Tina
one thing.
Vandenbroek says that Amber Rose weighs 400 pounds
Oh,
now.
Woohoo! Aw.
A heifer.
Literally.
And number
That's
two,
still not that heavy for a cat that age. Okay.
Number two, can the pencil sketch be erased after the paint is dried?
What I would do when you're doing this, just from what I've done, get your basic color layers down. I did that and then I erased. The more layers you put, the more that's going to obscure it, and you could potentially pick up dry pigment with it, if that makes any sense. So get enough color down where you can see kind of where your edges are, where the definitions are, then erase that very gently with a plastic-based eraser, like a vinyl-based eraser. It seems like it'll take it up well. But yeah, Katie, don't you think? Going on through the painting and then going, oh, I'm done, let me erase that.
Well,
Bad news.
to get to it, you have to erase the layer above it, which is the watercolor.
Yes,
It just makes a mess.
bad news. All right, so that's the wet on dry. Now, wet in wet. Some of these areas here, good, we still have that up there, were painted wet and wet. This was not quite dry all the way. I'm going to put a little right here so we can, actually I'll put a little bit right here since this needs that part anyway. This is not the same palette that I was using, but I don't know why it won't work. The paper needs to be damp. You don't want it to dry completely. See if I can get a color that looks similar to what we got going on there. Similar enough. Okay. And take this in and just wet this down a little so we will be able to see what we're doing with our other coat. Okay. So I've got that on. Almost this whole area is wet here, all the way up to her little cow keister.
Did you mask out her little eyelashes?
I did.
Yeah, I was wondering about that
It
too.
looks so good.
Okay, I'm just making a little bit kind of grayer brown to try. Oh, that was a lot. Okay, let's not do that. Okay, we can do that. I pull it up later if I don't like it. All right. So I'm going to take this, put the brush on its side. I'm going to kind of carve around here. Nice thing about a nice brush like this that's got that synthetic Kolinsky is you can use the edge to almost sculpt out places. All right, see how that's kind of bleeding out some where it's wet? Paper towel.
Would you think that a kneaded eraser would be among like...
No.
No?
It's rubber and it's sticky.
Okay.
They can get sticky with heat. Do
Oh.
not get that near your watercolor painting. Please
So-
don't, for the love of God.
Okay, so what's the best
What would you recommend?
for watercolor
White
paper?
vinyl eraser.
Oh, okay. I would have thought the opposite. I thought that would be too rough.
I would too, but
No, they're very soft.
our Vanish one?
The Vanish should work fine. Those Tombow stick erasers are nice because you can only erase right where that line is. In fact, that would be the best thing to use. Something where you're
Like
going to
a
disturb
mono.
the least amount of
The teeny teeny.
space. Okay, so you can see how this is kind of starting to bleed out. What I'm going to do is take that and just like over here, gonna kind of scumble some dirt.
Scumble.
It's not a dry brush, but it's not a super wet brush either that I'm using. Can everybody kind of see where that difference is? The paper's still wet, so it's providing a nice soft rather than a hard line. It won't dry with kind of that outliney look to it. Is this making sense?
Mm-hmm.
People are so quiet. I feel like I'm up here by myself.
They're all just soaking it in.
Watercolor paper pun.
Something mesmerizing about watching somebody do watercolor.
It really
It's very
is.
thin.
Okay. So see down here, this paper is drier here, so I can kind of, you can see that difference. But that's nice and wet there. So that's how this was done. It was just a little drier than this. This will soften as it dries. It'll match up a little more clearly to that. So that's just a technique where you're doing that wet and wet with it damp first, like that. That works really well if you're doing, say, clouds in the sky, if you're doing earth like far away, if you're doing, you know, like say you're doing the Grand Canyon or something like that. It's a nice way to not get that hard line stuff in there until you go the dry into that. Once it's fully dried, you just have to work quickly because it dries quick. And you can always blend and edge it out if it gets too hard edged with kind of a damp
I
brush.
don't know if you said this earlier, but for anybody who was asking questions about the block, that's a block.
This is a block.
So that's how it works
It's
on the
it's
block.
taped down on the edges.
And if you get an arches block and the top sheet of paper is black, that's to protect the paper
Yes.
underneath it.
They don't
Yes.
make
First
black
There's a
watercolor
black piece of paper over this so that your first layer is crystal clear clean, no oily hands on it. People send them back because they're like, I got black paper. I don't understand. What? You don't know how many people I've talked to where they're like, it's defective, take it back. No, you just haven't had a block before. It's really okay. Call if you have a question. Don't just send
Yeah.
things back because it might have been fine and you just wasted a whole lot of time. All right. So that's wet and wet blending. Well, we can probably take something there on the cow and do this. Let's see. This area
Is it showing how bright she actually is?
No.
here. See this area
No, but
here?
that white is bright.
Is that a hard enough definition, Katie, where if I soften that, I can blend it?
Where?
Where it's real dark right here?
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay. So what I would do if I want to blend that, I'm gonna, you know what, I'm gonna get the
one
Kolinsky
on
brush
the,
out.
Amy, the one on the same spot but the other side,
Here?
they're over a little bit to your right,
Here?
kind of that corner area. I can see the definition.
This
of it.
here?
Yeah, I can
Okay.
see the definition of that.
All right, so we're gonna take this and we're gonna soften it. Now this would work really well if you had a small flat. It just needs to be something, actually, you know what? Why don't we bust out one of these Filbert brushes? I'm gonna use this Filbert brush, or excuse me, not Filbert, the Delicate Lift Scrubber, where it's longer and it's got a little bit softer edge.
Got longer filaments, longer.
You just wanna go very carefully. Look how soft that suddenly made that. See how that edge just disappeared? See how you can see this hard line edge where that pigment came to that edge and stopped?
Could you keep working it if you wanted to like
Yeah,
blend it completely?
yeah. I mean, I just don't want to.
If your paper can hold up to it, I should say.
See how that. See how that looks like it blends in right there now?
Mm-hmm.
Was that pretty easy to see?
Yeah.
It's hard to tell with the light. There we go. Okay, so right there is where that edge just ended. That's how you do blending. You don't always have to use a brush this hard. You could take, I can take the little Kolinsky brush and right up here. I'm just taking that tip and rubbing it gently. The biggest problem with this, with using a natural hairbrush, is because it's absorbent, it may pick up and move pigment more so than this that's just a synthetic and that's a very tight filament. But you can, you know, if you just wanted it just a little soft and not so much blended in. See how that line is softer, but it's not completely gone? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Now, hard edges. This painting is a great example of this. Is because I don't remember any of that stuff from watercolor class. That's how I paint, just hard edges. Hard edges are applying the paint and getting that ridge that you can see all in here of where that pigment goes to the edge and dries that little bit crisper, like what we were just softening there. That's called hard edges. It's the principle of leveling out. You put it on, the darkest part of that pigment creeps out towards the outermost application. Okay, it leaves kind of a ring. Think of if you go to the beach, when high tide comes in, there's that little foam place so you can kind of see that ridge, and then as it goes out kind of at different levels, you see that. Or flood level. Don't take that the wrong way, people that just had flooding.
Yeah.
But if anybody that's lived near a river, when the river's high, it carves that area out of the bank that's always up there, which half the year, you know, 3/4 of the year, it's down lower. That is what that's doing. It's pushing that up to the hardest edge and then receding as it dries. So it's not a problem, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's wherever you want kind of definition or a nice textural effect. What starts becoming wrong with it is if your painting is full of that and everything looks too hard-edged. Sometimes you need softer points, sometimes you need kind of harder points. So that's something that you may want to kind of learn some different techniques that kind of help balance that out. Use it where you want that harder definition in your work. All right, glazing. With watercolor, glazing is a misnomer. With other types of media, I mean, it's still called that, but with other types of media, you're taking something thick like oil paints, you're thinning it way down and painting transparent layers. With acrylics, you're adding acrylic medium to thin the paint down and paint what? Transparent layers. Watercolor is transparent. Every layer that you're, for the most part, I mean, there's some that are semi-transparent, some that are semi-opaque. There's even a few colors that are opaque. But for the most part, what you are doing every time you're applying watercolor is glazing. So that's just something to kind of understand. It makes those layers more luminous. The more coats you put on, the light reflects through those layers. That's why it's beautiful and kind of transparent. Think of it like when you were in kindergarten. Yeah, remember everybody did the tissue paper collage stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And it's got, and you put it up to the light, and it's like a stained glass window, and it's darker where you put more layers, lighter where you don't. It's the same kind of thing. That's kind of what a glaze is. Now, there's something that I saw in one of the books I was looking at that was actually a really cool thing that makes sense, because with watercolors you're working from what? Dark to light or light to dark? Amanda!
Light to dark.
Pop quiz. Amanda passes.
You say stuff, and I'm like, doing stuff? And I'm like,
I know.
what is the question?
It's the teacher in me, you know. When you have the kid in class that's not watching, you're like, they're not paying attention.
Yeah.
So then you ask them, and they're like, ah!
So
I know you're working.
It's our job to not be
I
looking at
know.
you, right?
It's just the smart aleck in me. I'm sorry. Okay, so a good thing to do when you get a watercolor palette full of colors, or say you're going to start a specific painting. You're getting ready to start. You kind of don't know how those colors are going to play together. You can do some color prep before you do the painting. And this one book showed some really kind of cool things. So if I was going to do this and I was going to work with some yellows, I would take and make a nice swatch of yellow.
Push the paper up a little bit.
Sorry.
Yeah, move that camera back one a little bit.
Okay. Then I might take this other color's kind of a nice light color. Take a little bit of this. And I would put that next to it. It's kind of a nice cool yellow. Then I might try a little bit of the ochre here. You don't have to work with all of them, just maybe include the ones that you're planning on taking. Maybe some nice oranges. And then what you're going to do from there, kind of do light ones there, go over it with the nice transparent layers in the opposite. So you've got your vertical ones, how I'm doing it this way. You're going to put your horizontal ones over it once this has dried. Okay? So what that's going to show is if I've got these colors down, because I'm painting with my lightest ones first, and then I go over it with this green, or I go over it with this burnt sienna, or I go over it with an ultramarine blue, so on and so forth, what gives it that translucency? What colors is that going to make? Before I get to a painting and I'm like painting, say, a fall scene with leaves, I might not have thought adding this really pretty, you know, light blue over, say, you know, the orange. It might make the most beautiful golden brown that I never would have thought of because I never put the two together. So it's a good way of combining your colors and kind of seeing what happens playing with that transparency. All right, so it's almost like test strips. You're doing a color chart and you're doing test strips at the same time. Now, lifting out. We've made mistakes. Goodness knows I've made several. One of them is doing a watercolor episode. No, I'm just kidding. Kind of. Maybe. All right, so I've got some swatches that I did. So we did softening, so let's actually try lifting. Now, because I didn't look at these to know what pigments, what's staining, what's not, we're going to find out what works, all right? As you're working, lifting out doesn't always mean repairing. I could be painting, Katie, if I paint, yeah, right up here, we're gonna see it, all right. So I'm painting this really beautiful, really dark sky. That's darker than I thought it was gonna be. All right. Now I could go back in here with my, this isn't a correction, but it's lifting out. Go back in here with my damp sponge. I could lift out some of that color and start putting some clouds in. See how that works? Does that make sense? So you could do that while you're working. You could be making trees and lift out some areas that you want there to look like there's light coming through, like a fog, like haze. Then you can actually take color and purposefully lift it once it's down. We've got that scrubber. Let's see if dioxazine comes up. Look at that. And you can take a sponge, you could take paper towels. Let's see, with these you can get really small areas. Is that up there? Yep. See how much that lifts? With the filberts and other stuff, you want to be very careful to be very gentle. With this, I'm going to take a paper towel. You're not going to get back to the actual white of the paper, but that is darn close with that color, isn't it? Everybody see that? Does anybody have any questions about that?
They're all just oohing and awing.
With that same green, I'm going to take that. See how much you can take out? You can change something. Say you're painting a flower, your petal got out of control, whoop, it's everywhere. As long as that's not a staining color, even if you don't notice it until a little later, you should be able to go back, soften the edge, take it back to where your drawing is. You know, they're fantastic tools. See, with this red, this is staining, but it's still lifting some of it out.
Mary Monson has a question.
Sure, Mary.
What about permanent colors?
Permanent colors are the same thing as staining colors, Mary. They're going to be, is she talking about like alizarin crimson permanent? Is that what she's talking about?
That's what she's
Okay. With those, and with that book, that's why I'm saying that book was a wise investment. It talks about fugitive pigments in specific watercolors because it used to be very popular to have all these different colors that they found out through time don't stand up. There's some pigments in watercolor that are fugitive, right? Fugitive means it goes away, it fades after time. It may discolor. Something that was a beautiful red may turn just a horrible, ugly brown. That's because of there's no suspension in this. The pigment is just deposited right on the paper. It's offered absolutely no protection other than if you frame it in UV glass, right? If that same pigment is in oil or acrylic, it may be great. It may do fantastically. The same thing if you take pigments that may work great in watercolor, they may not work well, play well with oil or play well with an acrylic medium. That's why some colors they may be here in watercolor and not in other mediums, vice versa. Fugitive pigments, like say alizarin crimson, that's when you're wanting to look for the permanent at the end of the name. Or potentially like a hue, because they're hues because they want them to be permanent, chances are. With watercolors, I really suggest you always check the light fastness ratings before purchase. I don't care if your teacher says, if you like Opera Rose and you want it to be that really pretty bright pink for forever, you need to find another color that's close because that's fluorescent and it's going to go bye-bye. Does that help? All right.
Maybe I need to rush it though.
No, I think we
gotta speed it up a little
yeah,
bit.
I think we're almost,
You're on Fabriano paper there, right?
we're on Fabriano for all this other than the cow. The cow was Arsha's because that's just what I had at home. There's a few other techniques. Maybe we can just do like a little short thing of them and put them up on Jerry's Live later this week. Just talk about, because we've already seen how you do that, the gradation and stuff. There's something called running in that you already put down the wash and then you drop water in. We can do just a quick little short thing of that. That's true. But I think people do want to see the salt. What do you think?
Do the salt.
The salt's really fun.
Do the salt.
All right. Amanda's like, the salt. What's the salt?
Oh, I know what the salt is.
Okay, we're good.
But yeah, we can always do a little
Okay,
too and do
yes,
more
we need to do more, and there's other things. This is just the basics to help you kind of learn some brush control, learn some, you know, a little bit about color, a little bit about how to put washes down. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take, what color do we want, Katie? I guess it doesn't matter, does it?
You know what I'm gonna say?
With the green?
Tail.
Tail!
Any of the talos.
Okay, here, we're gonna do this first. We're gonna just put a mush of color down.
As long as it's a dark color, they'll be able to see it.
Yeah, let's do it on that phthalo, I think would be. We'll load both of these with.
Ooh.
Okay, we're just putting some pigment down. Now, what we're gonna do is, the salt makes the pigment run away. Katie's like,
Here's my
So
colors.
funny face. Katie gets so excited. All right. So you don't want to overdo it with salt, and you do need kosher salt because you need those bigger pieces. Table salt will work, but it starts giving it too much of an all-over kind of spatter. I'm just going to drip a little of this under fully in the... All right, make sure it's all in there. That's pretty good. Okay, I'm going to sprinkle. Can they see it moving away?
Yeah.
I feel like just a pinch. All right.
The dab will do ya.
Put a little bit more over in this blue section. Okay, as this starts to dry, it's pushing the pigment further and further from that salt piece. Once it's dry, you just dust the salt off. Not with your hand because your hand will pick up pigment. Use maybe a soft dry goat hair brush or just kind of hold it up and blow it off. Now this isn't something where this is going to give you like high technical, you know, razor sharp, picture perfect, photogenic, looks like a real picture. What this is perfect for is you could have like this great painting but want a really neat background. You can mask off the rest of the painting or mask it off first, do cool techniques like this, then go back, actually paint your other part there. I saw a really cool painting in one of the books I was looking at, a woman in flip-flops. So she's looking down at her feet. You just see the feet with their nails all done, and then the background looks like all these cool, fun, swirly colors. And she masked out a little like shell that looked like a little snail, like on the beach.
So cute.
So it was very cute. So we will post a picture in live of this tomorrow when it's all said and done, so people can kind of see what it looks like. Last questions, ladies.
Somebody commented that sap green doesn't usually lift that easily, but don't you think it's probably because of the stiffer brushes and the stiffer bristles and the scrub brushes?
It may not be sap green, it may be chromium.
If it's from the Turner set,
Is it? Does
there's
it have
not-
sap?
If there's not a chromium, there's a sap and a
Okay,
phthalo
I don't
green.
know what's in it.
No,
So
that's fine.
it definitely wasn't the phthalo green.
Right, that's
It
what I
was the
was
sap.
thinking.
So, but now, keep in mind, just because something is called one name by a manufacturer doesn't mean it's the exact same pigments as
Right.
another manufacturer. So before you buy it thinking, okay, this lifts and another one doesn't, check the pigments compared to one that you may use. It may not be the same. So, because trade names, just like we did that thing on paint, right, Katie?
Mm-hmm.
Trade names be darned. Just because it's called one thing doesn't mean that it's like magenta was a number of different pigments when we did that. So, other questions before we go? We good, Frida? Facebook?
That's it.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining. Thank you for putting up with my not having as much watercolor experience as in other. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you guys next week. That's where we put any